Welcome, everyone who has logged in today to follow our webinar. In 3 days, the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, will have its last ordinary summit of the year before the anticipated departure of 3 of its member states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Those 3 countries have reunited in what they call a federation under the banner of the Alliance des Etats du Sahel, or the AES by its French acronym. It will be very soon about 12 months that those 3 countries have announced that they want to quit the ECOWAS. At Crisis Group, we see this as a sort of historic moment if those 3 states will quit. And we think it offers a good opportunity to think about the prospects for the future in terms of regional cooperation in West Africa. So this is why we've recently published a paper that looks at those relations between the AES and ECOWAS and sort of analyzes the possible implications for an exit from the AES states. We've also offered some recommendations to both parties to make sure that the regional cooperation is not completely broken or will collapse. Because we believe that there's very important links to preserve not only economically, but also culturally, ethnically, and socially, as well as politically. So today we will speak about the potential implications of an exit of the AES states. And we also want to reflect a little bit on the future of cooperation in West Africa. And at Crisis Group, as you know well, one of our core objectives is to make sure that we reflect all perspectives of all parties. And we also speak mostly to all parties to do our research to have a balanced view of what could possibly happen. We have a French channel today for those who would like to follow this conversation in French. We will do the conversation in English though, and I would like to present to you or introduce to you Ibrahim Yahaya Ibrahim, who is the main author of our recent reports. He is the Deputy Director of the Sahel Project. And I also introduce his colleague Jean-Hervé Gézekiel, the Director of the Sahel Project, and Ibrahim will be leading the conversation today. Ibrahim, it's up to you.
Thank you. Actually, it's up to me.
Okay, it's over to you then.
I'll start and I will moderate. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you all here. So as you said, Pauline, we just published this piece on the relationship between the Alliance des Etats du Sahel and ECOWAS a few days ago. It is a Q&A with our Deputy Director, Dr. Ibrahim Yahya Ibrahim, and we are organizing this webinar today at this specific moment, this specific juncture. So in a few days, we will have this last ECOWAS summit of the year, also the last one before the withdrawal of the 3 AES states is official and fully complete. We at ICG, we still see this summit as an opportunity. An opportunity to avoid what would be what we believe is the worst case scenario, a disorganized and messy divorce. So to further discuss this issue, this is my pleasure to have my colleague Ibrahim Yahya here with us. And I'm going to ask him 3 questions before we open the floor to questions from the attendants. In advance, I apologize. We won't be able to take all questions. You're too many online right now. We will have to select a few. So in advance, sorry if your question is not selected. But with no further ado, let's turn to Ibrahim. So Ibrahim, you've been talking to a lot of diplomats and stakeholders in the last few months. In your opinion, what explained the current situation? What explained the divorce between ECOWAS and AES member states today?
But thank you very much, Hervé, and thanks everyone for joining us for this important conversation at a very crucial moment for the entire West Africa region. So just quickly to answer your questions, I think we should consider 3 things here. The first one is that I think perhaps the direct and simple explanation is that the divorce comes as a result of an overreaction on both sides on the coup that happened in Niger in July of last year. As many here know, the coup in Niger was the sixth military takeover in 4 West Africa countries in 3 years, after the one that happened, the two that happens in Mali, 1 in Guinea, 2 in Burkina Faso, 1 in Niger. And this new peak of military takeovers seriously undermined ECOWAS's effort to prevent coups and anti-constitutional power grab in its space. We know that over the past 2 decades, ECOWAS has maintained a zero tolerance policy for such anti-constitutional power grab among its member states. So that to try to stop the proliferation of coups, ECOWAS imposed unusually harsh sanctions, economic and financial sanctions on Niger, alongside the threat to intervene militarily to reverse the coup and reinstate the former President Bazoum Mohamed. Now, this threat to intervene militarily echoed strongly in Ouagadougou and Bamako, whose military regimes were already under ECOWAS sanctions, but also who saw the threat not only to Niger, but also that could possibly affect them. So they decided to side with Niger to form an opposition bloc to ECOWAS out of solidarity, but I think also for their mutual survival. So by exiting ECOWAS together, they succeeded at least partially, to insulate themselves from the regional bloc's pressure for a return to civilian rule. The second reason I would say is that the decision to withdraw is a favorable response to a demand pushed by some segment of the populations of these countries, who were calling. We know that several civil society activists, most of them close to the military regimes, were pressing those military regimes to exit the regional bloc. As we know, ECOWAS grew increasingly unpopular within the Sahelian public opinion. Its double standard approach, which consists of tolerating rulers changing constitutions to run for a third term, while condemning military officers when they topple them, has seriously undermined the regional bloc's credibility. Many have criticized it as being a club of head of states. Some have this, way of describing ECOWAS of the people rather than ECOWAS of the leaders, etc. So I think the sanctions that ECOWAS imposed echoed on this already strong criticism vis-a-vis ECOWAS, and created more hard feelings that pushed those people to even ask for that divorce. And I think when the military regimes decided to divorce, it echoed some of those voices within their civil society who were asking for that. The third thing I think is also the fact that the creation of AES has offered an alternative. The AES Alliance has offered an alternative framework for them. It's true, it is smaller, but they believed that the AES will serve their interests better than the regional bloc. They said the AES is modeled on NATO, which establishes a non-aggression pact and a mutual assistance in the event of an attack on a member state. They even push it to become more ambitious by signing the Confederation Agreement in July, establishing a more expensive framework for defense and security cooperation, and one that will allow them to better coordinate their diplomatic positions vis-a-vis foreign power. So I believe that those 3 things help us understand quite a bit, the reason why those 3 countries decided to leave.
Thank you, Ibrahim. A divorce is not always the worst solution. It can actually be sometimes kind of a solution. But do we have a precise idea of what the implications of the AES member states withdrawal from ECOWAS will be in the region?
I believe that there will be quite a bit of consequences, some of which we will only get to know down the line, down the road. But there are a few that have become very obvious. The first one would be economic sanctions, economic consequences. It is obvious that over the past 50 years of its existence, one of ECOWAS's major achievement was to promote a free movement of people and good across the regional bloc. We have most of all these countries have a passport that has an ECOWAS stamp on it, which allows them to circulate between those three places, between the entire region. So you have millions of people from AES member state who live in coastal countries, and their residency status will definitely be affected in ways that so far is uncertain how it's going to go. But the residency status is likely to be affected by this. There will be also consequences on trade. We know that the IOS countries rely on coastal countries' ports to export goods in and out. We also know that they export a lot of their goods toward coastal countries, more so than they trade between themselves. And all this are likely to be affected by the decision. Now, there are caveats to that. One of the caveats is that the free movement of people and goods has not been always respected. You know that Nigeria, for example, at some point had to close its border with Benin and Niger. We also know that some people, when they pass through the borders, have to pay fees to security services. But still, I think the free movement of goods and people stands solid in the region. The second caveat is that the exit is unlikely to spell the end of the trade relationship completely. We know that some of those trade exchanges go through informal routes that are very difficult to police, and that are likely to continue despite the exit. There is also the fact that all the countries between those two blocks are remain linked by other agreements, bilateral as well as multilateral agreements that allow for those free movement of goods and people. The second way in which this can have major consequences is security. We know that over the past decade, security has grown, has been growing very bad in the Sahelian countries, but it has also been affecting the coastal countries more and more. And there is a need for both countries from the Sahelian space to collaborate with countries from coastal countries in order to address those growing insecurities, growing security in both space. But there have been efforts in the past to an ongoing effort, actually, including the MNJTF, which brings together Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad to fight Boko Haram. The Accra Initiative is another one. But we have seen that those initiatives have been undermined by the standoff, the current standoff between coastal countries and the IOS countries. This is definitely not good news for effort in West Africa to try to address insecurity. The other one is regional integration. This decision is definitely a huge blow to regional integration projects. ECOWAS, whatever we say, despite all its shortcomings, has been the best performing and most economically integrated regional bloc in Africa. Its effort to regulate different sectors, including agriculture, pastoralism, energy, money laundering, etc., have been really have helped a lot. Those countries have strengthened regional economic stability. So the withdrawal is likely to undermine all those efforts that have been achieved over several decades. There's a criticism coming from the Sahelian countries who says that Western influence on ECOWAS has been excessive, and itself it is a betrayal to Pan-African cause. But their decision to leave is also going to undermine this idea of African unity, of promoting Pan-Africanism, etc., which they express as being one of the things that they want to promote in the region. So I believe that those. I hope this gives a few ideas about which ways the exit is going to have consequences across the region.
Thank you, Ibrahim. A quick reminder, there's channel for translation in French, and you can also start asking your questions. We will take them and we'll ask them to Ibrahim. But a last question from me, Ibrahim. So we have this summit in a few days. How should the ECOWAS head of state, handle the exit issue at this moment? Is there anything that can be done during the summit, and is there anything that can be done in the remaining weeks before end of January?
But it's a good question, Gervais. I think, well, let us first start by saying that since the decision to withdraw happened, there have been quite of shuttle diplomacy. ECOWAS has designated the Senegalese president, Diomaye Faye, as the facilitator in engaging dialogue with AES, and Faye in collaboration with Faria Simbe of Togo. And over the past several months, President Faye, his Prime Minister Sonko, his special envoy Abdoulaye Batili have been visiting some of the Sahelian capitals to try to negotiate and push for either the return, particularly I think the return of those countries in ECOWAS. Nigeria, which is heading the ECOWAS Authority of Head of State, has also conducted some diplomatic efforts towards the Sahelian countries. But so far, all this shuttle diplomacy has produced limited result. At least so far, it hasn't resulted in changing the AES countries' decision to leave. One of the problems is that the AES countries say that they think their withdrawal from ECOWAS is unlikely to have any significant impact. This is their belief. I think they said that the consequences are only going to be theoretical, but they also believe that given the strong public backing of the decision, if they decide to reverse course, then it will come with a high political cost to them. So they are weighing the cost of reversing the course as opposed to the cost of leaving. And for now, some of them believe that the cost of reversing course will be higher than the cost of going through with the exit. So in the 1-year moratorium is coming to an end, and the two blocs are yet to decide on the terms of the separation, and the tension between them remains quite high. So what we say, I think, in that paper is that perhaps the upcoming summit on 15th December would be the last chance to avoid a messy divorce. So one thing we say that is that the bloc's head of state should publicly recognize the seriousness of this situation that is facing the organization. I think it is the most significant challenge that the organization has to face since its inception. So they can come with, some exceptional measures to offer some exceptional postponement of the three countries' exit, and that postponement would allow some time to the facilitator of dialogue, President Faye, to try to convince both sides that the standoff has gone too far and that they should seek, some sort of compromise between them. There are two possibilities, I think, that might be pursued by President Faye. The most ambitious one, which is the less plausible, is to try to reverse the withdrawal. Is to say that, for President Faye to try to convince ECOWAS head of the state to send some signal, to AES countries, lifting sanctions, intensifying our rapprochement effort, etc., and also, pushing for more important and very much needed reform of within ECOWAS. And also trying to convince, the Sahelian countries that they will not be able to achieve any of their objectives, either in terms of security, economic, etc., by staying outside of the regional bloc. And then if now there is some sort of public support to the decision, the consequences of the decision are likely also to draw, some problems to them down the line, when people will have hard time. Tourists will have hard time to export their goods to the coastal countries, or to do business with those countries, or if Sahelians who live in coastal countries are in trouble, all those are likely to produce, some anger that might come back to hunt some the military regime. So they should be aware of that. But I think we got to be also realistic. Over the past year, this is the focus of most of the shuttle diplomacy, is to try to bring back those countries without any significant success. So we have to also acknowledge that this might not be, this might not happen, and then look for a second option, which is for the facilitator to work towards, negotiating a smooth separation that minimizes the impact of the withdrawal on the people of the region. So now, in that case, if this is a course of action, then the facilitator could first push for an agreement that grants the three Sahelian countries a special status, allowing free movement of people and goods. The facilitator also could try to convince both parties of the need to safeguard security cooperation, particularly in terms of intelligence sharing. And the facilitator could also push for the continuation of ongoing, development projects that are funded via ECOWAS mechanisms until they come to an end. Now, this is a lot to ask ECOWAS, right? So what we say is also for the Sahelian states to meet ECOWAS halfway by agreeing to move more quickly towards elections and the restorations of constitutional rule, which will address one of the regional blocs' main concern about the proliferation of coups. I think it is up to the head of the state who are meeting in Abuja on the 15th of December to try to prevent a messy divorce. If it's impossible to maintain those countries, at least to negotiate a smooth separation that would be that will allow, that will make it easier for people on both sides, but also will open doors for a quick return of those countries when the tension calms down. I will stop here and to allow for more time for discussions.
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. So we're receiving a lot of questions. Again, I anticipate that we won't be able to ask all of them. So I'm going to select a few and start with possibly two related questions to you, Ibrahim. So the first one is about the role of other actors than the one you mentioned in trying to facilitate or solve the current situation. And so we do have a question on the role of the African Union. Is there any role for the African Union to play in the coming weeks or even further? I also had the same questions for another international organization, which are the United Nations. They are present in the region. Diplomatically, do they have a role to play in the current situation? I guess I'll stop here with the two questions, and we have more to come for you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, if I can come in quickly, Jean-Hervé, if you don't mind, because there's a question about a very simple question, but it follows what you've been saying, Ibrahim. Do you think that ECOWAS can survive this divorce? Would the coastal states and the other ones who are not coastal, but would they have to build a new organization entirely? And maybe you can reflect a little bit on the fact that Mauritania quit ECOWAS some years ago and ECOWAS continue to exist. Of course, that's a completely different development, but maybe you can put that a little bit in perspective for us.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and thanks, Jean-Hervé, for those great questions. With regard to the last questions about whether ECOWAS will survive this, yeah, it is true that Mauritania left the organization in 2000, and the organization survived that. And I believe also the organization is going to survive even if the three countries leave, but it is going to be a massive change, a massive blow to the organization. I mean, This is 53% of the ECOWAS territory, 17% of its population. So it's compared to Mauritania, which is 3-4 million people at that time. We're not talking about the same magnitude of change that can happen. And if you look at the map, it's completely changed the map of ECOWAS. I mean, you can say this all are symbolic, but I think they are important. It's going to be a massive change for the organization, but one that it can, I think definitely it has the resources, it has capacity to continue without that. But what does that say if another change is going to happen if our countries just going to be allowed to leave the organization just because there is a change of regime that is happening? I do believe that if it's possible for the head of the state to find a way to prevent that, or to create a smooth divorce, that is going to be beneficial for both sides, for the organization, and most importantly for the people in the region. The second question about whether African Union and the United Nations can play a role. The African Union has had in the past, I mean, it still have the MISAHEL, the mission for the Sahel, that space that has not been very active recently, I would say. There are also the 3 countries are also under African Union sanction. So I'm not very hopeful that the engagement of African Union is going to change much in the current situation. The United Nations, I think, can always continue to do the good service, the good office effort. But in the end, I do believe that the biggest chance for this to be settled is between, is within the framework of ECOWAS. Is a facilitator, and then the ECOWAS, and then the AES member state. I think those are the ones that, from whom discussions between those, I think, are the ones that are likely to produce the most significant result.
Thank you. So we also have a number of questions on the consequences of the divorce, if it goes until the end. And we have a question on, 2 questions actually. The first one is on population movement. How will population movement be affected? Can we or should we expect more irregular population movement toward or from the AES country if controls at borders are getting more difficult with ECOWAS? And the second question is on the security consequences of the divorce. How do you anticipate that this withdrawal will impact, especially the fight against the spread of jihadi insurgency groups in the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are important questions. I think some of it we provided some answers in the initial segment. How would movement of population be affected? I think it will create more hurdles. It's unlikely that it will completely stop people from moving around. As I mentioned in the past, Nigeria, for example, closed its border with Niger and Benin, but that did not lead to firm closure of the border and stopping the movement of population. It just created new informal routes that people have to go through. It makes it more difficult for people to navigate. They cannot go through the main roads. They have to go through informal road inside, and this create new informal economy for people. It makes people's life just harder. But I also know that if Nigeria wanted to really close the border, they could make people's life extremely difficult. They have tried that, for example, on the border between on the eastern side of the border with between Difa and Borno. And in that case, people from Niger trying to cross the border to Nigeria had to come through, Zander and Maradi and go through to enter Nigeria because it was very difficult to. So I do believe that oftentimes states can create loopholes, knowing that this would benefit people. They could maintain the political decision to close, but at the same time allow. But if they want to really close it, they can close it and significantly reduce the possibility of people to go through the border. It is a case also with the closure of border between Benin and Niger. When it was closed, people were able to still cross. Particularly going through crossing the river, the Niger River. But most people knew about that. The Benin government knew about it, the Niger government knew about it, but they allowed those to happen while maintaining the closure, still, keep it a bit open for people to try to exploit those loopholes. So I believe that it's not going to result in hermetic closure of the borders, but it will make people's life extremely difficult. Perhaps also create new opportunities, for other people to exploit. Now, what about security? How would that be affected? Look, it is clear that over the past 4 years, there is an expansion of jihadist movement to coastal countries, to Benin. For Cote d'Ivoire, it has been even longer period of time. But for Togo, Benin, and now we are talking about Ghana. There have been this expansion of movement, and most of it, all of it coming from Sahelian countries. There is only one way that you can solve that, if you can collaborate, between between the countries from which the problem comes and the countries that are suffering it. Even if now this is caricature, right? There are people within those countries, particularly northern Togo and Benin, who are from those places, who have been recruited, who are established there. But still, I think you can only address that if you get to have a better collaboration in terms of intelligence, in terms of if you are able to coordinate joint actions. Oftentimes, this will be very useful. And as we see now, with the current situation, the standoff has really reduced the engagement between the coastal countries and the Sahelian state. And one of the reasons was that when ECOWAS threatened to intervene in Niger, the Nigerian, that created a problem of trust. Now does not trust that much. To work with anger first, but also problem of trust, to work with some of those coastal countries who were just a year ago thinking about coming to invade the country. So I do believe that this is a problem. We have started to see some change in that with the visit of the head of the chief of army from Nigeria, who came to Niger, General Christopher Musa, and started to re-engage the Nigerian military in terms of coming back to old collaboration between the two countries. But we have to wait and see whether there will be a similar defreezing of the situation of the other countries in the coming month. I also believe that the decision that the head of the state will take during the upcoming summit will be extremely important in opening or shutting down those possibilities.
Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. So we are receiving a number of questions on the role again of external actors. So I'm picking 3 questions that are related to this issue. The first one is on big powers, and I leave it to you to decide, what is a big power and which of the big powers you want to include in the question. But to what extent, big powers' interests are influencing the current dynamics in the region, and more specifically, the current tensions between the AES and the ECOWAS. A related questions, in the case, AES actually leaves ECOWAS, which international organizations or which country do you envision will or should support the AES? And the last question, do you think that recent or ongoing events in Syria could lead AES leaders to revise their position and possibly to be more open-minded with ECOWAS partners? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure I get the sense. Maybe the person who asked the question about Syria can flesh it a little bit more to clarify what he means. I mean, Syria is a bit far away, and I'm not sure I see the direct link between the situation that's happening in Syria and the situation that's happening in the Sahel. But the person who asked the question can flesh it out so that to help me to understand it. Now the power dynamic, the great power competition. It is a fact that over since the coup happened, we have seen a shift in the region, significant shifts in terms of partnership with international actors. In the past, Western actors with France in the leading position have been influencing the decision making. They have been, they put in place the stabilization mission, the stabilization mechanisms to try to address the security situation in Mali in particular, but also in Niger and Burkina Faso, with boots on the ground, with a lot of money to support regional mechanisms, even the regional mechanisms that we were talking about. G5 Sahel, for example, that was significantly influenced by France. And this has changed now. Since the coup happened, we saw, one of the major shift was, for the three countries to cut, to significantly reduce their diplomatic engagement with Western countries. They have asked the French forces to leave. They asked, in the case of Niger, they asked the American forces to leave. The MINUSMA forces, they withdraw from G5 Sahel, etc. So they took several decisions to try to distance themselves from Western countries. Even if we have to mention that some of the Western countries still engage in those countries in the Sahel. And in the case of Niger, for example, Italy still have forces deployed, even if the other countries have withdrawn their forces. At the same time, they shift alliance. They drew closer to Russia, with Russian, paramilitaries deployed in Mali, with Russian, advisors, security advisors deployed in Burkina Faso and Niger, and the countries buy more weapons from Russia, Turkey. They have developed a greater relationship with Iran than it was in the past. So there is a significant shift in the way that the countries behave. Now, I do not think that contrary to many people who think that their decisions are dictated by Russia, I don't think that. I think they make their decision. We explain the reason why they exited from ECOWAS, most of it related to domestic, but also regional dynamics. Russia supports them in the decision that they made. When they created the AES, Russia was one of the countries that came first to acknowledge the AES. But I do not believe that these decisions are dictated by Russia. I think the countries find their interest aligning more with Russia than with Western actors at this particular moment, and this is what they are doing. I'm not sure I understood the last questions on this, Hervé.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not receive further comment, but I guess, my guess on this question is that, Syria is seen as an example of the limitations of the alliance, of the military alliance with Russia, at least, in the long run. And I guess the question is, right now the three countries are shifting alliances, and ECOWAS, the rupture with ECOWAS, is part of this shift in alliance. So, this new situation in Syria that is showing that, when you make an alliance with new partners and especially with Russia, this may be short-sighted. This did, can it affect in any ways, the current situation? But I think you started to address, this question already.
Yeah, I don't think I am not seeing any direct movement of that. Yes, it can send a signal that that alliance of Russia is not the silver bullet neither. You can produce some result by siding of Russia, but also Russia cannot solve all your problems, and perhaps in the long run, what happened with the Assad regime can happen, even if I'm not sure really the dependence is the same. Perhaps the Assad regime depended much more on Russia than these countries do today. The challenge that the Syria was facing is of different nature than the one that are faced by this country. So I'm not sure I see a direct linkage. And one of the things that you can see is that these countries, yes, they side of Russia, but some of them are very knowledgeable also of the risk of that. I think some of them look at what is happening in the Central African Republic. They see, effort by Wagner to expand their power reach to try to control the government, etc. And I think they realize that if they leave too much space to Russia, this can also be uh, something that may affect them. And I believe that they try to mitigate that by keeping some form of distance. If you look at Niger, I think, or even Burkina Faso and the others, I mean, it's not the same type of relationship that they have with the Russians. Russia is not, controlling those regimes in the way that they control other regimes in other places.
Okay, thank you. So just to give you, an indication of the time, we still have 15 minutes of discussion with you. We are receiving still a lot of questions. I'm trying to select, the ones that are on the same thematic. And we have ones on, again, on the consequences, and also on the divorce with ECOWAS affecting other forms of solidarity. Especially within the UMOA, the WAMU Union. So the questions are the following. First one, what signals have you received in the impact of ECOWAS retreat with respect to WAMU integration? We also have a question on currency, which is related. What about the prospect of the AES leaving the franc CFA zone and creating their own currency? What would be the potential impacts and challenges of them following this path? And maybe a last one. Yeah, could the apparent divorce between AES and ECOWAS undermine the credibility of ECOWAS as a regional bloc? And could this also lead to wider disintegration in the region? So we have 3 questions for you. More to come.
Wider disintegration. All right. Okay. So how is the situation between ECOWAS and IAS affecting YMU? Look, all 8 countries of YMU are members of ECOWAS, and the IAS. Some of them have been among those who, from the beginning, adopted a very hawkish position vis-a-vis iOS countries. So I think it is unlikely, but some of those countries may also continue to press if the exit is to go through. There is a fear that some of those countries may push for also pushing those countries out of YMO. But I do believe that this is really unlikely. Countries have to be really extremely hawkish to push that. And as far as I know now, the state of the conversation is not to push those separation lines too far. maybe it's not, the separation is not going to come from the coastal countries, but rather from the IOS. And that we know that from the beginning, one of the topic of conversation that has been very that has been very mobilizing a lot of the support of the military regimes was the idea of exiting, the franc CFA. And from the beginning, the creation of IOS, that idea of getting out of the currency union has been floated around. I think it was in November 2023, the three countries' Minister of Finance met to decide to create, an investment fund and the stabilization fund. And all those decisions were meant to lay the ground for the establishment of a currency union. Some of them say that openly that they consider the idea of leaving YMU and leaving the franc CFA. But I think technically it's very difficult to work out, such a divorce because it can create a huge, it can destabilize hugely the economic and financial system in those three countries. So I think they are taking, very careful, cautious action in that regard. But the idea of creating those stabilization funds are meant to lay the first ground for that, and they are signaling this, desire to leave the currency. So this is wait and see. We will have to wait and see whether they will continue to do that. But they are not the only one who is pushing for a change in the franc CFA. The other countries also in the region are pushing for that. There is a project to create ECO. So perhaps, if the positive sentiments dominate all this conversation, then even exiting, they can maintain themselves within YMU, and then together YMU can decide to move for a different currency in the future. That's not unlikely. But all this is, I think, something up in the air now. I think the political situation has to be dealt with first before we can see some movement in the other side. Could divorce undermine credibility, wider disintegration? I think I'm not a prophet of doom. I don't want to think that it's the end of the world. I think it is, as I mentioned before. I think it is a huge blow. It will have major consequences. Would ECOWAS be disintegrated? I don't think so. I think ECOWAS still have resources, to pull from and maintain its existence. It is definitely not a good situation, but I think it can survive that. Yeah, I will just say that. I don't know if there is another one that I haven't answered, Jeremy.
I think we're fine on that. They were, more or less related. Maybe a couple of, I'm sorry, I'm still receiving more. So a couple of questions, more on bilateral relationship and the consequences of, the iOS withdrawal on specific countries. Do you see border conflict be reactivated, especially between Benin and Niger? As we know that there are tensions on the borders between the two countries, and the same question on Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire. There have been rising tensions in the last few months between the two countries. Do you see this developing beyond rhetorical and maybe a diplomatic tit for tat?
Those are really important questions. So yeah, for decades, we haven't seen much of interstate conflict in West Africa. I think partly because of the mechanisms that were put in place by ECOWAS, which helped to prevent those kind of of conflict. Most of the conflict that we see in the region were intrastate, civil wars, civil conflict. That's what we see. But since this change happened, we started to see some threat that conflict like that might come back. We have seen, this growing tension between Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire, and the accusations, even at the highest level of power, people's pointing fingers, particularly the government in Burkina Faso pointing fingers at Cote d'Ivoire. Strong tension at the border between the two countries at some point. There is accusation from the Sahelian countries that some of those coastal countries are hosting opposition members who are trying to destabilize them. Is the case with Burkina Faso pointing fingers at Cote d'Ivoire. Niger has been pointing fingers at Nigeria, for instance, because Abuja was hosting some of the supporters of Bazoum. Mali has been pointing fingers at Mauritania at some point because Mauritania was hosting the CSP, the leaders of the rebel groups from northern Mali. So you see tensions, and like you mentioned, Benin and Niger for a while, several months. Up to now, I think the Nigerian government has been publishing informations about actors who are trying to destabilize Niger, but coming from the border of Benin. So this is very worrisome development. It's hopeful that Niger is now and Benin are now trying to sort out that tension, the border tension between the two countries. It is, I think, and the two countries have exchanged, ambassadors. I think those ambassadors would be active in trying to dispel the diplomatic situation between the countries. But tension still remain very high, and very high also with between Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire. As I mentioned before, with Nigeria, I think there is a sort of, de-escalation with Niger at some point, particularly after the visit by General Christopher Musa. So hopefully we will see, this de-escalation dynamic winning rather than the escalation that we saw so far. But I agree, it is a very worrisome situation.
Okay, thank you. So maybe the last two questions for you about maybe solutions and looking ahead. So one of our attendees here is asking a question on on possible solutions, and is suggesting that I'm trying to translate from French because the question is in French originally. Could it be a solution to, at some time, reintegrate the three AES countries, not on an individual basis, but as a bloc? Meaning that reconnecting with the AES as such, as a bloc. And the related question that he asked is, if this were to happen, then there will be a need possibly for a deep reform of the ECOWAS fundamental texts. And maybe adding a question on that and trying to push you a little bit further on the solution that we at ICG we're putting on the table. Our recommendation line is to, in a nutshell, is to freeze the process and to say, we need to give more time to time right now, and with time we could have more shuttle diplomacy to avoid what will be the worst case scenario, meaning this messy divorce. We've been hearing from a lot of diplomats when we discuss this recommendation line, that one of the risks is to further weaken the ECOWAS, further weaken also the additional protocol, as if there were no consequences for not respecting this protocol. And I'm curious to know okay, what Crisis Group is putting on the table is asking the CEDEAO to the ECOWAS to do one more step, to do one more compromise. But what do we ask from the AES itself? What compromises the AES countries, are willing to do? Is there any compromise that they are actually willing to do in the coming weeks?
Tough questions, right? All right. So the integration of three IAS, I'm not sure I get the question. So whether IAS could absorb whether ECOWAS could absorb IAS as a block rather than individual countries. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that would be a stretch. What is yeah, I think ECOWAS is a union of countries, of states and nations. I'm not sure IAS as a bloc. One thing that ECOWAS could do, which we pushed for in the paper, is for ECOWAS to acknowledge IAS as a useful framework, because it is one. If it can help those three countries to coordinate their security actions, to try to address, cross-border insecurity, that is very positive. And ECOWAS has already, within ECOWAS, there are so many blocks like that that ECOWAS support. And this is a much needed one that ECOWAS can support. And I think tending hands, acknowledging that could help in the conversation with the IAS member states. So I do think that this could be a useful thing to do. But with regard to your question, Jean-Hervé, about freezing the process, yes, this is what we ask to avoid the worst case scenario. And it is a stretch. I agree. ECOWAS is used to trying to find a difficult compromise like that. For example, these countries should not be participating in many of the ECOWAS meetings, etc. But ECOWAS is sending them invitation to come so it is a compromise concession. It's not compromission. It's compromise to try to keep open the dialogue and the engagement. So I think they could do that. But you're right to ask the question: are these countries willing to make other compromise? And this is ECOWAS's dilemma, I think. On the one hand, they, in order to keep the organization together, they need to make a very difficult concessions and compromises, but to countries that may not accept to make any compromise. And this is what they have been saying from the beginning, that it is over. They're pulling out. They're unhappy, etc. And they even accepting to despite all the compromise that ECOWAS reaching out all the years of diplomacy, a year-long diplomacy, they're still saying that this is irreversible, it's immediate, etc. And this is what the scary part of it, that despite compromises coming from ECOWAS, the IOS countries are not meeting them halfway. And I think it is difficult. We still ask them to do some compromise in the paper. What we say is to say, at least accept to speed up, to expedite the transition period, to organize elections, come back to constitutional rules. I think that will send a positive signal to ECOWAS. ECOWAS is very scared that this proliferation of coup will continue. But if you start expediting the process to organize elections, then it can help with the threat that military regimes will continue indefinitely, and then it will have some it will feed into the idea in the region that other countries can do it and get away with it. And this could be a very positive signal. Mali is also already thinking about organizing elections. This is very positive. I think this should be strongly encouraged. And then I'm sure if Mali does it, then the other two countries will also start thinking about doing it. One thing people are asking, and this is my last point, people are asking about, but who can influence them? The right actor to influence them is themselves. If you can, IOS is it's an alliance in which each other they influence one another, and the best way to influence them is to come through one of those member states within the bloc. If you can get that actor to accept one compromise, then the other ones can follow much easily.
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. This is a great concluding line. Huge thanks to you. We are close to the end. We actually passed our time. I just pass the floor to Pauline for the final words. A minute to you, Pauline, to conclude this session.
Thank you very much, Jean-Hervé, and especially thanks to you, Ibrahim, for this great conversation and all your explanations. And I'm also very happy to see that you try to end on a positive note and say you don't want to be a prophet of doom, but there are some opportunities for cooperation and for a slightly better future that won't see a messy divorce. But I guess we'll find out some of that in the next 3 days. I want to thank everybody for who attended this webinar, for your interest, and also for those who have sent in our questions. We really appreciate it. We want to be as interactive as possible, and we really enjoyed doing this today, and we'll hope to see you in the future.